It's day 3 of the Advent calendar, my friends. Yesterday we talked about dark events, Advent Lancers and Shield Bearers, and priorities. Today we'll talk about Cascading Decisions, Vipers and the Faceless, and encounter management.
The time has come to reclaim our world. Welcome back, Commander.
Incoming transmission.
Day 3, Strategy, Cascading Decisions. Cascading decisions is the idea that you try reasonably hard for your ideal scenario, and if something interrupts that plan, then you immediately revise what your optimal scenario is in relation to that new circumstance, and then you try for that. And if something interrupts you, you revise again, and you try again for a new optimal scenario. In the strategic layer of the game, this is going to be simpler than in the tactical layer. So you're trying to research something, and it turns out that a new enemy type requires you to upgrade your med kit, or you discover that you need battle scanners to deal with the faceless and burrowed chrysalids. So you're researching the next weapon tier, and it's time to revise your optimal scenario. It turns out that the new weapons aren't going to help you as much as the battle scanners, so you stop research on weapons and you start research on battle scanners. So there you started with your optimal goal in mind, I want better weapons. You discovered that you needed, in the tactical game, something different. You then decided that your optimal goal was actually to have battle scanners. You change your plans. So, nice and simple. You do it all the time in every game. It is the most important skill in the strategic and tactical map when you're playing XCOM. Possibly a little less important, tied with it for importance occasionally, is risk assessment, knowing what is actually most dangerous to you. Because without that, it's going to be hard to create an optimal scenario that actually will follow through the way you want it to. So, the first thing you want to do is figure out the order of events that creates your optimal scenario. For this example, we're actually going to use a tactical example, even though this is the strategic section of the game. This is so important that I think you have to know exactly what I mean, so that you can clearly define it for yourself and do it on a regular basis. So, what does it take to create your optimal scenario? Then you take each event one at a time, and if any of those events leaves you unable or unlikely to achieve your initial goal, you change your mind. Not as easy as it sounds, but you're already an expert. Trust me, you play video games. So take this tactical example. You are about to ambush a squad of Advent with 2 troopers, a mech, a captain, and a shield bearer from full squad concealment. You're totally concealed, and you have 1 character of each class. So that gives you 8 actions. Your first thought is to move your ranger close with a shotgun and snipe the captain. Your sharpshooter can go to the roof where they'll be really effective. Your specialist will hack the mech, and your grenadier will do whatever is left. Take a shot at someone out of cover, blow down the mech, whatever. Grenadier doesn't have a specific plan. So, what you'll have left after that is a bunch of tough, boosted by the shield bearer, but relatively ineffective Advent troopers you can pick off over the next turn or two. But what order do you take your turns in? You should ask yourself, what is riskiest? Probably the riskiest thing is the mech's mini rocket, as it could leave 1 or more of your soldiers wounded and without cover, exposed to every one of the enemy's fire. If the captain makes the troopers more accurate, sure, sniping the captain with a shotgun is going to be an awesome reveal, and you're going to terrify them and all that. And if you try the hack first, then the enemy is going to become aware, and your whole squad will be exposed, and you'll use that awesome taking a shot from concealment at a poor exposed trooper effect. But if that mini rocket is still available, then your poor ranger is going to be too close and liable to be instantly annihilated by a rocket and a couple follow-up shots. So you lead with your hack. That succeeds, and you proceed with the original plan. Everything cascades nicely into a pile of advent corpses and spare parts. But what if the hack had failed? Time to reassess. Now you need to spread out your squad to avoid the mech's AoE. That rooftop looks a lot more questionable because you could take additional falling damage if the mini rocket nukes your sharpshooter. So suddenly your plan has huge holes in it. Time to pick a new one. So you took one action, you reassess, and then you figure out what your optimal scenario is now. You decide to pull back and concentrate fire on the mech. If it's dead, then the rockets aren't so bad, and if you pull back and spread out, not too many of the enemy are going to be a gang up on any one of your troopers, your soldiers. So what's the optimal scenario now that your specialist is out of the equation and the enemy is in cover? Because of course when you tried to hack, it would activate that pod and everyone would take cover. So now all the troopers are harder targets than they were to begin with, and you can't really expect to snipe them down without using a couple turns. Well, if the mini rocket weren't an issue, you wouldn't have to retreat. So you decide to try and kill it with as few actions as possible and see where that leaves you. So you wanted to pull back and kill the mech. But it turns out, when you think about the order of things, if you killed the mech, you wouldn't really have to pull back or spread out, and you could spend more of your actions attacking the enemy. So, what is the fastest way to kill the mech? An armor shredding minigun attack from your grenadier is then your second action. And it hits, leaving that mech at less than half health and shredding off its armor for someone else to follow up. So now you're sure you don't have to retreat. Your ranger's right there with a shotgun, takes it out. You can then move your sharpshooter up like you originally planned on the roof, where they can take very accurate shots at the troopers down below, probably the captain like your original plan had been. And those are your 4 actions. And it puts you in about the same spot you would have been. Now, what could go wrong? If you'd carried on with that initial plan, but your hack had failed, you could get 2 of your soldiers nuked by the mech. And then 1 or 2 of the troopers might still have a turn left, and they could snipe your dudes while they were out of cover, leaving them dead on the ground. So, really important. Figure out what you want to do in very small chunks. Try to do it, and if that ever becomes impossible, stop, and then reassess what you actually want to do. So, Cascading Decisions, it's going to play an important role in all of the topics today. But that's it for strategy.
Incoming transmission.
Day 3, Tactics, Vipers, and the Faceless. So today we're going to be talking about the Viper and the Faceless. Awesome enemies in XCOM 2. I'm excited to see both. The Viper is an evasive, disruptive, mid-range combatant that can pull soldiers out of cover, disable and crush them at the expense of its own actions, or spit venom in a small area of effect. So the Viper doesn't seem to have too much health from what we've seen, more than any of the troopers we've seen so far, but all in all, it's not too hard to take out, and it seems to be very aggressive and not as concerned with cover as other enemies, but that could simply be the demo. What you can expect from them is lots of special ability use. I would say relatively low damage per turn, and to have to spend actions recovering from the Viper's tricks. The way you can counter them is to Spread your soldiers out just a bit. Not even as much as you would to dodge a rocket, but you want to avoid being in a 3x3 square that contains more than one soldier, because that's going to draw the AoE spit, just like it did the Thin Min in XCOM Enemy Unknown. But you want to avoid also being spread out too far, so that if one of your soldiers gets pulled to the Viper, your other soldiers can't then engage it. So expect a mix of Thin Min and Seeker kind of tactics from Enemy Within. Long range fire is going to be your best friend here. Sharpshooters with squad sight are going to be the perfect person to save one of your soldiers if they are being crushed. And generally disrupting the rest of the enemies or killing them is going to help you out a lot. If your soldiers have reduced efficiency for 2 rounds, there's nothing better than having the enemy soldiers also with reduced efficiency for a couple rounds to give you time to recover. Medikits are going to be really important to deal with venom, perhaps make you immune. Better armor will make you resistant, so then you might end up having soldiers who can tank the venom, or the Viper won't target with that. And once you get used to its AI, you're really going to be able to dominate the Viper in combat. So, what about the Faceless? So the Faceless are huge, lumbering melee monstrosities that are initially disguised as civilians when you enter the map, and which can damage multiple soldiers a turn with their scything claws. They're likely to be very passive while in civilian form, so as to not give away the fact that they're a huge lumbering monstrosity. So try and keep them away when other enemies are present. If a civilian is walking towards you, or the civilian pod is suspiciously getting close to you, just avoid them to buy some time, or back away from the other enemies so you can deal with it. The fighting withdrawal is going to be the key to countering these things, whether they are in civilian form or giant clay face mode. So, best thing to do, avoid them until your whole squad can... Well, okay, so you can expect from the Faceless, expect them to be in every civilian pod. If you're wrong, no biggie. If you are correct, you might have saved yourself from having to deal with a Faceless and a whole squad of other enemies. Expect that a Faceless is equivalent to a whole squad of other enemies. And you'll need a whole squad's worth of firepower to take it down, possibly over multiple turns. Like, they could be that bad. They look pretty bad, and I think they've said they are actually the largest enemy in the game. And generally big equates to high health pools, armor too. Also, the things definitely look like they could regenerate, just saying. Also expect high damage, but that it isn't too hard to avoid, because it doesn't have a ranged attack like a Berserker in Enemy Unknown. You can back away from it. So, how do you counter it? First off, you avoid it until it is alone. So you isolate, avoid and isolate. Battle scanners, they've said, will reveal Faceless, which is great. Battle scanners probably also going to work against chrysalids, so seems like it'll be really important, especially in retaliation missions, I would guess, if that's when they use the chrysalids. Which seems likely if you think about it, because while maybe the Viper can roll around in a human city, it seems really unlikely that civilians would be okay with the advent if chrysalids could roll around the city, or they knew what Faceless were. So, they're probably going to use them in retaliation missions, would be my thought. And the last thing is fighting withdrawals. Now, this is a skill you're going to need anyway. It's the idea that whoever is close enough to take a hit from a melee enemy, either back off one action, one blue move, or completely dash out of the way, while the people who are far enough away to be safe take pot shots until the thing is dead. This is really easy when there's only one enemy, which is why you want to isolate these things. and it can be much, much harder and or impossible if you're pinned down by lots of other enemies. So the fewer enemies you're fighting besides the Faceless at one time, the better chance you can get away without a scratch, despite its intimidating presence.
Incoming transmission.
Day 3, Disposition Encounter Management. So, the most important thing you can keep in mind while playing XCOM is that you want to be fighting as few enemies at a time as possible. Since enemies come in groups of pod, you want to fight one pod at a time. Now, you may find out you're facing enemies when you thought you weren't, i.e. you run into a pack of civilians and one turns out to be a Faceless. Suddenly you're fighting one pod. Be extra careful not to trigger anymore. So, the number one way to avoid triggering extra pods is to carefully control your line of sight. Since pods are triggered when you gain vision of them, or when they wander into your vision, you need to keep your vision as small as possible, as narrow as possible, and when you can't help that, if you have to spread out your vision, try and spread it out over areas that you know are safe. So you're going to want to kind of spearhead formation where one person is ahead of you and just one, and he's not too far ahead, he's not revealing too much territory, and when you move, you don't move too far into unknown territory. It helps to have the rest of your squad at medium or long range, whatever they can, as far away as they can fight effectively. It's also nice to have long range characters because they can take advantage of tall buildings for a longer period of time. As you move away from the far building, the sharpshooter with squad sight can continue to fire from the top of it, getting that awesome aim bonus no matter where the rest of your troops are. So, if you do trigger multiple enemies at once, like maybe a Faceless pops up while you are fighting a squad of Advent troopers, then it is time to withdraw. Don't try and duke it out. That is too risky. And since XCOM is a long game, the riskier behavior, eventually it will catch up with you. The more risks you run, the sooner they will catch up with you, and the sooner you will lose someone that you care about. So, withdraw when pressured and make them come to you. Set up Overwatch ambushes, steady your aim. The nastier the enemy, the more preparation it takes to kill them, and you need to focus on staying safe, pulling back when you're overwhelmed, and taking them out as they trickle towards you. So, that is the basis of encounter management. Everything else depends on what tricks you know, what tricks the enemy knows. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that I think the ability to remain concealed that the Ranger gets after the rest of your squad is revealed is going to be incredibly helpful. If you played Enemy Unknown, Enemy Within, and you got the Ghost Armor, imagine a character that can do that the whole time. It almost doesn't matter that he's not attacking, that you're down a whole soldier, because as long as you're only fighting one pod and you know, like, the other guy is out there, the Ranger's out there gathering information for you, preventing you from engaging too hard when other pods are wandering close, you're going to be so much safer that it's totally worth it. So I'm going to say you should certainly try that out. Maybe it won't be as effective as I think it is, but I can almost guarantee you that the most hardcore players on the highest difficulty are going to have a scout out there telling them when they're going to run into multiple pods and working out how to avoid it. Because as the enemies grow more powerful in difficulty, in the various difficulty levels, you absolutely cannot continue to fight too many of them at once. So there you go. Encounter management is key, and Cascading Decision plays into this. If you realize you're getting outnumbered, you need to back up. If you figure out there's another pod that's about to activate, best not to engage at all, even if the situation was initially favorable for you. So, keep a close eye on how many enemies you're fighting, and unless you can crush them in a turn or two, you should strongly consider backing up, going into Overwatch, steadying your aim, and getting ready to ambush the one or two that trickle forward. Alright friends, that's it for day 3. If you enjoyed this content, please go ahead and like this video. If you'd like to see the next Advent Calendar video as soon as it comes out, please subscribe to my channel. And please join me tomorrow when we'll be talking about personnel management, mechs and turrets, and hostile takeovers. It's day 3 of the Advent Calendar, my friends. Yesterday we talked about dark events, Advent Lancers and Shield Bearers, and priorities. Today we'll talk about Cascading Decisions, Vipers and the Faceless, and encounter management.